drought is usual, rain is unusual, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to shift your thinking from that perspective. So therefore, you've got to be very opportunistic about rainfall.
Well, welcome to the call. I've got Darren Doherty here, and I thought we'd have a bit of a discussion around the drought. Everyone seems to be talking about the drought and how bad it is and that. And I thought, well, hang on, there's some things we can do to maybe prepare for the next drought, or there's some practical things we can do rather than just throw our hands in the air and go, well, it's here. So I've known Darren for probably almost 10 years now, and he's done some incredible things around the world with land, large and small. So my question to you, Darren, if I don't know anything about farming, I might have bought 5 acres or 50 acres or something. What can I do? Some basic practical things to prepare myself for the next drought or whatever. So,
okay. Well, thanks for having us on.
And I could be a person that, I don't have a farming background. So I'm like, let's just keep this really simple and talk some practical stuff.
Well, it doesn't really matter if it's what farming background you've got at all, because the advice is pretty well the same. But thanks for having us on, Dan. As a starting point, good to catch up again. We've had a few long car trips together, which has always been entertaining.
Yeah, it's been good.
Look, the first advice we always have to anyone is cover your soil, because drought starts with the climate of the soil. As P.A. Yeomans put it back in the 50s in his book, The Challenge of Landscape, the development and practice of keyline. And the climate of the soil is dictated by whether it's got a blanket covering it or whether it's completely exposed. And so that's our first start to anyone. So manage to try and keep a residue of cover. Whether that's if it's in a dry period, don't eat your grasses down or your pastures down so that you've got absolutely nothing there. Keep a little bit of residue, and most importantly, try and keep a residue of litter in between the plants. So even if you've got an annual based pasture, which a lot of people have, particularly in the south of Australia, then even if you've got that sort of thing where it's all dead over summer, you can still keep a bit of a cover, which is really important, because if you do get any summer storms or whatever, which are often more intense, then it won't all run off. It'll more likely infiltrate. That's really important. Same for people in the northern parts of Australia where it's more summer rainfall. Try and keep a bit of a cover, because it'll just insulate the soil surface from losing all of its moisture. And when the rain does come, because it does, and it will, then your soil will be ready to infiltrate that water, as opposed to having it all run off and have all of your nutrients run off as well, because that's all sitting there waiting to go, as well as your soil itself. So that's our first advice: protect your soil from the raindrop. Make the raindrop always hit something that's living, or some residue of something that was living.
Okay, so with that, are we mainly talking about grazing? So to keep that cover, we're saying that what's going to take that cover off in most
cases,
farms, it's livestock. Is that what we're talking about? It's
livestock, yeah. And I know you work with chickens a lot, and chickens, well, they scratch the ground surface, and we've just had regulations introduced in Victoria, for example, for pastured poultry, where you're not allowed to have any more than 50% ground cover loss, and that was some of our work. Us and some other colleagues put that in, which is probably the first ground cover regulation ever in the world, which is great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It is, because ground cover is the basis to establishing landscape function, and one of the core elements of landscape function is rainfall infiltration.
Yeah.
So and for us, that's a real core principle of drought protection. So other things that you can do which go up from that, like that's a starting point, work from the ground up, as it were, are things like, pay attention to what watershed you're in. And we work with people to work with their maps on Google Earth or something like that, to help them understand what catchment they live in, whether it's a small catchment or whatever. So liken your landscape to a roof. A lot of people say, you know, how big a tank should I have off my roof? Well, where do you start? You start with the amount of rainfall you get on an average year or on a low period.
Yep.
And you work out the square meterage of your roof, and you times the rainfall times the square meterage, and that tells you how much rain comes off your roof. It's exactly the same off a landscape, except it'll be in hectares, probably not square meters. And that'll tell you then, how much water you're dealing with when you do get runoff.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the biggest things in a drought is when the drought breaks, how well are you going to be prepared for the next drought? And so you got to do that. You got to do that planning in between, knowing that often what follows a drought, and Dorothea McKellar in her famous letter home called it My Country said, Australia is a land of droughts. Oh, my country of droughts and flooding rains. All right. That's what happens. You get droughts and then you get flooding rains. That's the sequence here. So be prepared for that by understanding how big your land roof area is, so that you can then look to a whole range of strategies, whether that's building roads which have gradients, which capture water and enhance the amount of water you might have go to your dams. That's something we've done quite a lot of and has been a saviour for some of our clients. So we've got one in central western New South Wales, the Hicks family, and they're out north of Dubbo. And they got one 35 millimetre rainfall event out of the blue. And because we designed a road system which had a gradient on it, its hard surface collected all of that water, and they got a 3 megalitre dam filled up overnight. And that was enough for them for the next year.
Yeah, wow.
Right? So there's stuff like that you can do, but you've got to start with a map of your place and a bit of an understanding about how to work out how big your roof's going to be. And there's lots of other things. It depends on whether you've got livestock or not. Paying attention to the climate and the patterns that are before you. Always planning. A lot of people in this country or in any other country that's drought stricken, especially if they're of European origin, which most land managers in this country are, then they think that drought is unusual, when it's actually the other way around. Drought is usual, rain is unusual, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to shift your thinking from that perspective. So therefore, you've got to be very opportunistic about rainfall, and if you get it, be surprised, but don't be surprised by drought, because that's the main operating system here. Yes. And it will always be that way for a variety of reasons. So therefore, if you are coming into what is usually the non-growing season, then understand that there's a high likelihood that will be drought, that there will be drought through that, and that you should cull whatever you can. So that you bring your numbers down to a level that your feed reserves, whether it's standing feed or stuff that you've got in the shed, will be able to carry you through. Because that's unfortunately the thing that a lot of people have done is they've held on to too high numbers for too long.
Yeah.
And of course, then they start buying, making the mistake of buying feed to keep animals alive. And look, I'm here in Victoria, and there are so many trucks going past my gate every day with hay, which is going north.
Yeah.
And all of that hay is using borrowed money, right? Which is not a good situation to be in, versus those people who culled early or destocked or reduced numbers early, and they're not in that same position, and their land is not getting overgrazed. And so on, it just becomes this cascade of outcomes.
Yes, and I love that how it's back to the start of don't overgraze and keep the ground cover, keep that blanket. So, and the thing which I think is a good message for Australia, like drought is usual, And
Yeah.
I don't know, and I don't want to blame the media or whatever, or who's feeding the information, but it sort of comes of like, oh, we weren't expecting this. But then you go, well, hang on, let's just look back through history. Goes, we've had a lot of these. This wasn't the first time it's hit. And that's why I thought, let's have some conversations to think now, how are we going to prepare for the next one? And I like what you said with the Hicks family there. Just by putting a road in the right spot and the gradient correctly, you can fill a dam that's going to service you for a year. Like that's just, as you've mentioned.
Yeah, well, that's what'll happen. Watch,
planning.
the next rainfall event, people will watch all this water run down roads and they won't pay attention to it.
Yeah.
When a road, when you look at it in catchment planning, there's something called a coefficient of runoff, right? And so different surfaces absorb water in different ways. So if you've got a sandy soil, for example, then it absorbs more water than it runs off. If you've got an iron roof,
yes,
runs off about 95% of the rain that hits that roof will run off. Some will splash off and gutter and so on. Some of it will evaporate. But if you've got say a clay soil with a really good surface cover, then you might get about 10 or 20% runoff off that. But if it was a sandy soil with a good surface cover, you might only get 5%.
Yes.
So if you build a road and it's packed hard, made out of clay, it's probably 60 or 70% catchment coefficiency. So it's way more efficient as a catchment surface than your well-managed landscape. And that's one of the things that we found why we do this often is one of the byproducts of good management is less runoff off your landscape.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're getting much more infiltration. And so you can't rely on your landscape to run anymore, which is a good thing. Yeah. So, but you still need water in your dams, right?
Yes.
So therefore, how are we going to get them filled, right? Well, you go, well, geez, I better start badly managing my land again so my dams will fill up. Well, no, you need to put structures in place which are strategically designed to both service your property from an access point of view, because you need access, but also to double up in their use and also service catchment needs.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
We do a lot of that work, and it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So, what are some other things that come to mind of someone like? As I said, we've got the property. We're going to make sure we don't overgraze it. We're going to keep some cover on it. We've worked out the size. We've now got the mindset. Hang on, drought is usual. Let's maximise. What would be some other things that come to mind, Darren?
Well, really good. I mean, probably, and this is not short term. I've given you sort of the short things that you can do. You can get a grader in and build a road fairly quickly. About $2 to $5 a square, a lineal meter for a 3 meter wide road with a road grader. So that's pretty easy.
Yeah.
And relatively inexpensive for the performance. You can buy an electric fence off if you've got your chooks. Well, you know where to go there, chickencaravan.com.au for a Premier 1 electric net fence.
That's an ad everyone.
Or if you've got livestock, get into electric fencing, go and do a holistic management course with someone like Graham Hand or Brian Wellberg, or with RCS, the team up in Townsville. Go and learn a bit more about drought planning and that sort of thing. So that's something you can do there. Or, of course, you can go to agrarians.org. And then, so once you do that, then you're looking at the other strategies, and that's around things that are a bit longer term, like tree planting, fodder tree planting, shading, all of those things which reduce the water needs of different animals and of your system overall. And the great thing about a whole range of fodder shrubs and those sorts of things is that even when there is a drought, they will produce.
Yes.
And whether that's concentrated pods or forage, leaf forage, etc. And that's something that a lot of people are not considering perhaps as much as they could. We have had in the Agrarians Workplace, which we run all of our online courses on, we've had a number of people from southwestern Queensland and central western Queensland and whatnot who are on a current course we're running. And they're talking about doing saltbush plantings and Other people are talking about doing Tagessäste and different acacias and all of that. There are quite a lot of resources out there, a lot of research that's already been done on planting fodder shrubs and whatnot.
Yeah.
Those have got obviously much deeper root systems than a lot of species have. They're, if they're native to drought tolerant areas like Australia, well then they're already ready to go, and that gives you another buffer. But you can't. That's not an instant thing. You have to wait for these things to grow. You've got to exclude livestock while you're doing it, and over time, bit by bit across your farm, you can start to put those things in. That's another big thing in this, I think. Apart from, especially if you're a grazier or a livestock manager, having a really good grazing plan. So whether you're a chicken grower or whether you're a cattle grower, sheep grower, llama, alpaca, horse, whatever, if you've got animals which are out on your property and you're trying to, then you've got to manage the resources that you've got. Otherwise, you're going to have to buy it in. And that's I know with chickens you have to buy food in, right? That's omnivores. We know that. But with herbivores, you don't necessarily, if you get your stocking rate settings right, and treat your land like a block of chocolate. That's the way I look at it. In the growing
Careful
season,
who you say that to. They might go, block of chocolate. Yep, I've done. What next, Darren? Where's the next one?
The problem is that there's two blocks of chocolate. There's one that's the magic pudding, and it magically grows back after 30 or 40 or 50 days.
Yes.
And then there's another one when you eat it, you go, oh, where's that 2 years gone?
Yes.
And that's the drought block of chocolate.
Yeah.
Right. You've got it's a rationing system.
Yes.
And so, and that's where you've got to do some planning. You've got to look at your resources. And that's where, like I said, the likes of the holistic management people with their planned grazing processes and the people like RCS, Resource Conservation Services, running out of Townsville, people like them and us, they can give you the training on how to set up grazing charts and understand feed planning and forage planning, so that because this is the danger that happens. You reduce the health of your animals, you reduce the health of you, and you reduce the health of your landscape all at once, and probably your bank balance as well, right?
Yes.
And planning is there to prevent that, because if you don't plan, it's much more likely that will happen.
Yeah.
If you plan it, at least you've got some sort of plan where you're trying to predict what some of the outcomes will be. And then you can look at before you're stressed and before everything gets too far ahead of you, you can look at the strategies and then tactics about how you'll respond. So that's a really big, strong piece of advice. And that's, again, something you can do straight away, because all of it's there. And there are people who are doing really well right now. And that's the story that is not being told, unfortunately. There are quite a few land managers out there who are doing a lot of the things that I've been talking about, particularly the holistic managers and the RCS people. They're doing really well. I mean, obviously, you're not doing as well as they would like, because, the rain's, there's no rain, right? But they're doing a lot better than a lot of other people, and their landscapes are not getting as pummeled, and their bank balances are not getting as overdrawn as a lot of other characters out there are.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and it's good to know that people are, with the right management, doing okay in these times. And one thing I found,
I'd like to do better.
Yeah, that for sure. But in these times, like for me growing up, I remember seeing the media, like when you'd hear about farms in the media, it was always negative. Oh, they don't have any money, there's a drought or whatever. And I grew up with a mindset, having not being directly on a working farm, but connected with farms and family with farms and that. This negative thing, so they don't make money, and then the drought. But realizing it was just what the media was, that just sells newspapers, or the old story. And then it wasn't. So I had this mindset, farmers don't have money. And then after time, I met some really good managers, and it's just like, he's just bought that $220,000 tractor and he paid cash and he didn't really need it. Why did he buy that? Well, he can't buy a Porsche because he lives on a dirt road. And you go, and then I'm going, oh, okay. And then to go some of these cattle stations that with really good management go, he's got a helicopter. Yes, it's for grazing, but he also takes his wife to lunch in it. And you realize, hang on. And for me, I had to break my mindset to go, farming, it's actually, and I use the example, you've got two farmers next to each other. They both grow Angus cattle. This guy makes money year in, year out. This guy's still rolling out of bed at 9:30 and I'll get to that next week sort of mentality. The land's the same, the product's the same, but it's the management. And then I'm like, hang on, there's a lot of people doing really well in the same drought, same rainfall. And I sort of had to, in my own mindset, where did I get that from? It was the old story of like portrayed often in Australia, sort of growing up in schooling of like the only time you hear about the farming industry of, well, something bad's happening.
Yeah, that's right.
And then realizing, well, let's have these conversations to go, there's actually some really good things happening. And we actually can make a difference. And when the water hits your roof, it's sort of like the example, if you don't have any gutters and you don't have a tank and like it's raining and it's dripping off the end of the roof and you hold your cup there and go, I've got a drink, and it stops raining tomorrow, he goes, it's a drought, isn't it?
I know.
I can't fill my cup. So it's good to know we can put a gutter, downpipes and a tank on the house, but we can also do some basic things with the land. So the takeaways... It was
pretty telling a few years ago that I think it was a year apart. I remember Barnaby Joyce was standing knee deep in water out at St. George, and then a year later there was a drought, and it was like, hang on.
Yes, yeah.
A metre of water, if it was infiltrating, I mean, people like Gabe Brown, over in the United States, I mean, they had big floods there in the Midwest of the United States this year, and Gabe Brown, who a lot of people would have heard of for his work with mixed species cover cropping, he's been out here, and holistic management, pastoral management. He infiltrated the last thing I heard was 13 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. So, that's 325 millimeters of rainfall in 24 hours that he infiltrated completely.
Yes.
Right? Now you do that because of management, and he's in a bit of a hard area of North Dakota. I mean, people think, oh, the US is easy and whatnot, but there's some hard areas there.
Yeah.
But the fact is, because of his management, he was able to infiltrate that much water. That's the difference between a landscape having a huge flooding issue versus having groundwater that's actually there for the next drought.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And the reason, and this is another part of this whole play, is because we're managing soil carbon so badly, because we're not covering our soils as well as we could and so on, then there's no reserve, there's nothing to actually hold on to the water that does infiltrate. So practices which increase infiltration also tend to increase soil organic carbon and the depth to which that is placed, right? And I think it is, there's a few variances on the figure, but with every 1% increase in soil carbon in your soil at 30 centimeters of depth, you're talking about a difference of between 140 and 160,000 liters of extra water that you're holding per foot, per hectare.
Yeah.
So you put that in context. If you're one of these people who's increased your soil carbon, say, up to around 8%, which in a lot of areas is a really great figure, and you've got that 30, 40, 50 centimetres at that percentage, you've literally got Olympic swimming pools of water held by the carbon in your soil and by all the microorganisms, because microorganisms sequester water into their bodies, like you and I are mostly water.
Yeah.
And one of the if we go and die and go out the bush, well, then the first thing that goes is all of that water disappears. It evaporates out of us, right? And we become this shrunken shell of what we were. And so it's not just the carbon, it's also the bodies of organisms which are sequestering and giving up and exchanging all of this water in the soil, which we need to foster. So that's a very important outcome, and that's something you can draw upon, because water is like capital, right? You build capital for the purpose of being able to draw upon it when you need it. And that's, if you look at a sort of an overarching theme here, it should be really that we're building water capital into our landscape at every opportunity, and looking at every organism not just being something that's physical, but probably most organisms looking at them probably as water first, as storages of water. A tree is mostly water. A grass is mostly water. Organisms are mostly water, right? So the more life you get into the system, when you get the opportunity to have life, then you can draw upon that later on, particularly when it comes to the water in your soil. It's very, very valuable. But that's something that people can do, but they'll have to get ready for when the next rainfall events come.
Fantastic. I love that example, the water capital in your soil. Like the water has landed, as you said, if Barnaby Joyce was in knee deep of water, there was water there. The question is, where is it now? And it's easy to say, it's all flown down the river. Of course it has, but it's just
it's in the atmosphere, or it's gone and landed in the ocean. It's and that's the thing. I mean, what's happening now, people are talking about, as you hear in every epic drought that we have, people talking about, we need irrigation's the problem, the savior. Or the other thing, looking for someone to blame, or all the cotton growers stealing, or this going on, or that's going on, or there's some sort of bad news about that. But to an extent, some of that's correct, of course. There's some malfeasant behaviour going on out there, which is horrendous. And irrigation is something that is a useful tool. But the first irrigation, and P.A. Yeoman's put this very well, he said the cheapest source of water is infiltrated rainfall. So it's not new. He wrote that in 1954, right?
Yeah.
So it's not new, right? It's just a matter of, do you want to practice an agriculture that actually protects the water capital in your system? Because think about it this way, even in a dry year, you still get maybe 200 millimetres of rainfall, 8 inches. Some people it's going to be less, maybe let's say 4 inches, 100 mil. Well, 100 mil is 100 litres of water per square metre.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not and often when you get dry years, that will all come at once.
Yeah.
It's very sporadic. You go bang and you go, wow, where did that go? Right?
Yeah.
And you get on Facebook and that great group, Who Got the Rain? And you see all those people spotting up saying, I got 3 inches, I got 4 inches. Wasn't that great? You partly our dancers worked and all that stuff. And then you go away from that and it's like, well, what happened to that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Every square metre of your landscape just got 100 litres, and what happened to it?
Yes, yeah.
Or in some cases, what happened to that 8 inches? That's a 44-gallon drum of water every square metre. Right?
Yeah, and I remember hearing you, I think it was Savannah Farm, where you said that particular farm, I think it was 600 mil, so 600 litres. And that just blew my mind, because I just imagine like a shuttle, like 1,000-litre shuttle, like sitting there, and I'm like, man, if we could have got that up on the stage and filled up with 600 litres, you go like plonk these like end to end everywhere. That's what landed here, and you go, oh my goodness. And then thinking about management on the basic source, like for maybe a 4-year-old, if we put a little garden hose on there and then we gave it a little bit of a sprinkle, and then next day a bit of a sprinkle, and like budgeted that water, like catch it, suddenly you go, I reckon I could grow like a square metre of grass with 600 litres of water a year. And I still remember you talking about that, going, man, what are we doing with this water? Like we're the stewards of it now. It's like handing like $50. Like, what did you do with it? So
it doesn't quite work like that. I mean, obviously the rain
yeah,
comes and you're not irrigating with it.
yeah,
But if you, like I said before, if you get as much of that infiltrated as possible and
yes,
practice agriculture, which is sequestering as much carbon as you can, well, then as well, practicing agriculture like agroforestry, where you can get some trees involved, keep your covers, all of that sort of thing. It's all going to help to keep as much of that water from evaporating and from running off. Because I heard a figure years ago from the CSIRO that something like 92% plus of Australia's rainfall that hits this continent on average either runs off or evaporates. So both of those things are things that you as a land manager can control by starting with your blanket, and that's a mindset, and that's a management. And then so start with you, the climate of your mind, so that you can get the climate of the soil and the climate of the soil surface sorted out, which you'll do through management. And then over time through planning, then start to put in your trees and your shrubs and, all those sorts of other nice things that you want to have in the environment, so that over time you're building up a climate resilient system, a system that's resilient to the climate that you have. So it's not a drought resistant system or a drought resilient system. It's a climate resilient system.
Yes.
Because this is the climate of Australia.
Yes.
Right? And that's it. So it's not, and I'm starting to throw out the word drought so much because it's like, I went to a farm in New Zealand years ago, near New Plymouth and Taranaki, and I was standing there with this bloke, this grazier, and they have, you'd love this, Dan, they have water troughs. They fill up their water. They've got this, they're called the Taranaki trough, and they're a sheet of roofing iron that's built on 4 posts, and they're on a slope. So it's like a little, one sheet of roofing iron, you can imagine, on a little four posts. Yeah. And that slopes, and then there's the trough.
Okay.
Right? And that's how the trough fills.
Wow.
Right? There's no pipe to the trough. Yeah. Because they get that much rain that's so reliable. And the bloke said, "Oh, geez, it's been bloody dry here, mate. Oh, it's the worst I've seen. We haven't had rain for 3 weeks." It's like, now, and he was in, and they were starting to talk drought and all of this. I'm going, mate, you've got no idea, right? And I've been to the United States where people say, "Oh, it's 6 weeks, and we haven't had any rain." And and I did a drought proofing course in England. I mean, who does drought proofing courses in England, right? Yeah. And one in Iowa, they get 45 inches in Iowa, and all the rest grow 200-ton bloody corn crops and all that. But the thing is about drought, it's all relative to what you're used to with your climate. So so even the bloke who doesn't get rain for 3 weeks, if his setup is all around having rain once a week, then if it's 3 weeks, then that's out. And it's just the same. Right. Yeah. If you're in Australia and you're used to having a system that doesn't get rain for 6 months, but then you don't get it for 18 months, it's the same ratio of difference.
Precisely. Yes.
So, you've got to you got to think that way. So that's why I think we need to be thinking about climate resilience, which is looking at the whole system, and that includes when we get floods. Flooding is, heavy rainfall is part of a climate just as much of a drought, or prolonged periods of no rain is, or unusually prolonged periods of no rain is part of a climate. And so that's what I think we've got to start getting our heads around, because otherwise we start to focus too much on one end of the climate, not the whole climate. Which is really important from my perspective. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. We've covered a lot, and I really hope that this is a lot of value for people that they might already know about it. It could be a refresher, or for people to go, where do I start? So I really appreciate your time, Darren, and you have a good Christmas, and who knows, we might do a follow-up call early next year.
No worries, mate. Well, it'll be lovely to see you, and Merry Christmas, and all the best to your family for the season too, mate.
Righto. Thank you. See you later.
Right.